Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
The village of Old Pier was, in fact, a very old village. Wooden houses, gardens with potatoes and cabbage, dusty streets, and a small shop. In the small store, they sell everything from bread to rubber boots. There was also a school, and not just any school, but one that included a high school branch, much to the delight of parents who wanted to do everything possible to get their children into college or university. Although many kids thought they didn't need sciences at all, why, for example, all this mathematics, they struggled with the 4 arithmetic operations, and that's enough for them. Counting money at the store, settling the bills for utilities, that's sufficient. But almost all the graduates wanted to leave the village, to cling to the city, and if they were not lucky with a university or college, to find a job as a maid, waitress, bartender. It didn't matter, life would be easier, and most importantly, more interesting than in their small homeland. Huge shining shopping centers, cinemas, beauty salons, sports clubs, the opportunity to drive a car, wear good suits, and maybe even travel abroad. All of this was very enticing. Tina, too, secretly dreamed of starting a new life, but she couldn't really dream about it. After all, she was raised by her grandmother. Once upon a time, Tina was a weak child. Any cold ended up with pneumonia, and her parents didn't know what to do anymore. "They can't afford to let me take sick leave so often," Mother would say bitterly to her father. "Now it's your turn." "Yeah," the father responded skeptically, "when you sent me for bottles to the dairy kitchen, they already told me that I'm not the head of the workshop, but a wet nurse." It's hilarious, a man sitting with a baby, running to polyclinics, and cooking porridge. The parents could argue for so long, and Tina just shifted her gaze from one to the other. She felt that all the family quarrels were happening because of her. But what could she do to bring peace to the family? Of course, the girl didn't know. Finally, an idea occurred to her father. "Let's take Tincha to her grandmother, to the village. She'll get fresh air there, and raw milk, and eggs from the backyard chickens." Mother thought about it and decided to take Tina to her grandmother. It must be said that the girl missed her for a short time, and the absence of the usual conveniences, like a bathtub, an electric stove, a telephone, and the like, didn't bother her at all. In the city, Tina had to go to kindergarten, where she didn't like the nanny at all. She was sharp and strict, and the boys, at every convenient opportunity, teased and bullied the girls. If Tina was sick, her mother would stay with her, feed her daughter, and give her medicine, considering her duty fulfilled, and, without a guilty conscience, she would spend hours talking on the phone with her friends or watching TV series. But her grandmother never forgot about her granddaughter. Later on, Tina realized what the love of a grandmother meant. It's when it's so cold at home in the morning that you don't want to get out from under the blanket, and the grandmother gets up at dawn, brings firewood, and heats up the stove. Tina wakes up, and it's already warm. She can get out of bed. Senora Esteban didn't spoil her granddaughter. From a young age, she taught her to help with everything. Together, they fed chickens and collected eggs from nests, and they also fed the goats. They went to the store together, cooked and cleaned together. "I don't know how your life will turn out," the grandmother would tell her granddaughter, "but the most important thing is to be strong, never give in to despair, then you will cope with everything, and you will overcome everything, and everything will be fine for you." Senora Esteban had her own passion, needlework. Of course, nowadays, you can buy anything in stores, and if you want to embroider, buy a ready-made kit with the suggested threads, and you're good to go. But Senora Esteban always had very little money. Her pension was small. She had worked as a rural postwoman all her life, and there, the salary was meager. Tina's parents initially sent money for their daughter every month and regularly visited, bringing gifts. But then, when they were convinced that the little girl had stopped getting sick, they started visiting less and focused on their own lives. And it seemed to work out so well for them that they even got divorced. First, the father found himself a lover and filed for divorce. The mother tore and flung herself about, seeking sympathy from her friends. They advised her to go to that other woman, to confront her, and at the very least, give her a piece of her mind. But then the mother bought a ticket, went south, and returned from there with a fiancé, a retired military man, a widower, a reliable and serious person. Soon, the mother and her new admirer officially got married. When they visited one last time, which was a couple of years ago, Tina thought that she had never seen her mother so happy, and she couldn't help but notice that the dearest person to her in the world was her mother. In reality, her mother hardly noticed her daughter. It was just customary to visit her, to check the box, so to speak, and then she would come. The next morning, her mother and her new husband left, and about a year later, they had a long-awaited son. They were both happy, and nobody remembered Tina anymore. The father went to work in the north for earnings. The new wife finally made him work to bring money into the family, and the mother was immersed in taking care of the baby. It was clear that Tina's family consisted only of her grandmother. In the upper grades, the girl had to think about how to build her life further. Valentina liked sewing the most. She could spend whole days, and sometimes nights, at the sewing machine. At first, she sewed on Sonora Esteban's Indestructible Singer, and then the mother of her classmates sold her an electric machine for next to nothing, saying, "It's just collecting dust at my place, and you can use it." There was some catch to all this. The woman started bombarding Valentina with orders. Remembering that she got the sewing machine for next to nothing, the girl would fulfill the orders for free. She sewed dresses, skirts, and blouses. Thanks to the skill she acquired from her grandmother, Tina also tailored her own clothes, and she managed to contribute something to the family budget. Tina always consulted with her grandmother, and Sonora Esteban was ready to approve any sewing project of her granddaughter. But in the winter, when Tina was in the 11th grade, a tragedy occurred. Sonora Esteban's legs completely gave out. With great effort, they managed to take the old lady to the district hospital for examination. "Without surgery, the spinal condition won't improve," said the neurologist, "but it's an expensive procedure. I can put you on the waiting list. Maybe your grandmother will manage to get a quota. In the meantime, you'll have to stay in bed, take painkillers and injections." Tina cried. She understood that she couldn't leave now to go study. She needed to be by her grandmother's side all the time. But how would she find work here? They needed money for medicines and doctors, too. Tina's graduation night was especially tough for her. Her classmates, who were already former classmates, talked excitedly about where they were going to study. Tina could only remain silent. The most important thing for her was for her grandmother to recover, even a little. And that would require a lot of effort and finding a job. Valentina was already thinking about sewing clothes and going to the district center once a week to sell her creations. But a few days after graduation night, the school cook, Rosa, came to Tina's home. "I found a job for us," she announced triumphantly right from the doorstep. "Where?" Tina was surprised. "Remember the house, that mansion that some eccentric built on the outskirts? It's been abandoned for years." "Yes, but some millionaire bought that house. He liked our region." "And what will he do here?" The girl continued to wonder. "He says he'll move his business here." "What kind of business does he have that he can easily move it to the middle of nowhere?" "He breeds purebred horses, and you know how great our nature is. The horses will have plenty of room here." "What does that have to do with us?" "Well, think about it, Tina. The estate needs to be cared, and this guy will need servants. I will go work for him as a cook, and you, as you call it now, will be a housemaid." "I won't be able to handle it." Tina was scared. "Businessmen are probably demanding people, and I've never had to keep such a large and luxurious house in order before." "Don't worry, just listen to how much he pays," and Rosa named a sum that made Tina sit down on the bed. "Don't be afraid. Are there many chores to attend to for one man? Cook some food, clean up the house. The kitchen will be my responsibility, and the cleaning will be yours. And he will surely bring all sorts of appliances, vacuum cleaners, washing machines. I heard that there's already an automatic machine that washes the floors. Tina, this is your chance. I know how much you need the money. In short, Valentina, you need to go to him for an interview on Monday." "Where should I go?" Tina was now completely frightened. What does he want to talk to me about? Don't be afraid, and don't look at me like I'm crazy. He'll just look at you, see what you're like. He'll explain what your responsibilities will be, and if you agree, you'll start working on Tuesday. In Valentina's quiet, orderly life, this was such a grand change that she hardly slept at all that night, from Sunday to Monday. In the morning, she left food, drinks, and medicine by her grandmother's bedside, put on her best dress, and set off on unsteady legs for this mysterious interview. The mansion in question stood apart from the village. Tina noted it as an inconvenience. Carrying construction materials all the way there and reaching the store would be quite a hassle. Then she mentally scolded herself for her thoughts. Businessmen probably aren't bothered by such problems, they'll have everything they need delivered. A small forest separated the mansion from the village, and beyond that, there were fields stretching out. It would be so pleasant for a horse to roam here. Tina had been near the massive red brick house before. It looked more like a castle than a house. "Who are you going to see?" One of the workers called out to her. "The owner." "Go ahead, he's inside. His office is on the first floor." Valentina entered the house somewhat timidly. Several rooms on the first floor had already been furnished, and Tina immediately understood that she needed to knock on the oak door with a beautiful ornate handle. Yes, a pleasant male voice sounded, "Come in." Tina felt that the owner was very busy or in a hurry. She became even more nervous and squeezed through the door almost sideways. The man, around 30 years old, was standing by the window, examining some documents. He cast a glance at Tina, and she thought he was the most handsome person she had ever seen in her life. Perhaps before becoming a businessman, he had been an actor or a model. And maybe that's how he became wealthy. Dark-haired, with hazel eyes, his facial features were as if carved by a sculptor. Valentina noticed that his shoes and suits were probably worth a fortune, and she remembered how she used to enjoy looking at pictures in fashion magazines and then try to sew exactly the same clothes from modest and inexpensive materials available at the fabric store. "I'm listening." The man raised his eyebrows, apparently trying to understand who Tina was and what she needed from him. "I came to inquire about the maid position." Valentina tried to keep her voice steady. After all, she wasn't here to ask for charity but to work. The owner put his papers aside, sat down behind the luxurious writing desk, and pointed at a chair. "Please, have a seat." She sat on the edge of the chair with her back straight and her hands on her knees. "I could have brought people from the city here," the man said, "but all the servants stayed where my wife and children live, and I don't need that much help alone. So, I'll consider non-professionals." For some reason, Valentina felt a pang. Perhaps for a few moments, she had hoped that the man was not married. No, she didn't believe that a wealthy, handsome man would take notice of her. Sooner or later, his wife would arrive, probably a demanding woman with high expectations, and she would treat the housemaid and cook as third-rate people. "My name is Senor Dominguez," the man continued. "As you can see, I have a lot of work here, so I'll be busy from morning till night. If the house is well maintained, the clothes are in order, clean and ironed, then I will be satisfied and happy. If you can handle your duties, it means that next spring when Veronica comes here, you'll stay on our staff." Tina involuntarily wanted to ask if he assumed that being a maid is the dream of her whole life. But she held back. If she could earn enough money to cure her grandmother, she wouldn't stay as a servant. She would enroll in college and then return to her hometown. Even if they paid her 5 times less there, at least she would be treated with respect. "You will be living here." Valentina explained that she couldn't leave her grandmother. After this, Senor Dominguez nodded approvingly and released her. As a parting note, he mentioned her salary once again, and Valentina returned home feeling elated. The interview wasn't as intimidating as she had feared, and she spent the day busily taking care of household chores. She even hummed quietly, which was a rare occurrence for her in a long time. The next day, at 7 in the morning, she was already at the mansion. Aunt Rosa fed her breakfast while sharing what she had learned. "Our owner is just a regular person, not pretentious at all. Yesterday, I made him croutons for breakfast and fried eggs. He thanked me for everything. Only when he tried the coffee, he wrinkled his nose and said, "Never make coffee for me again, Rosa, I'll brew it myself." He has a machine in his office that makes the exact kind of drink he likes. Valentina learned all of this and started taking the aromatic drink to her master herself. Senor Dominguez was straightforward in his dealings, never raising his voice, but he also praised the servants extremely rarely. Valentina didn't know if her master was pleased with her or not until, in passing, he mentioned that he would raise her salary next month. So, she had managed. Now Tina felt financially secure. However, her first paycheck disappeared instantly. She bought the medicines her doctor had been insisting on for her grandmother, and a gas boiler was installed at home, eliminating the need to deal with firewood. Although she had a significant amount of money, it vanished quickly. She couldn't even buy something for herself, but Tina knew that next month she would receive even more. Then she could start saving for her grandmother's operation and maybe buy herself a down jacket, or perhaps something she had never had but always desired. A fashionable handbag, for example, or cosmetics. After all, she was already 19, and she still didn't really know how to use makeup. One time, Valentina made a blunder. It wasn't entirely her fault. She was ironing Senor Dominguez's clothes. The iron was excellent, light, and emitted steam when needed. The pile of ironed laundry was growing, but when it came to a delicate batiste shirt, something suddenly clicked in the iron, crackled, and a light wisp of smoke appeared. The fine fabric smoldered. When Victor peeked into the room, Valentina was crying, covering her face with her hands. "My goodness," for the first time, his voice had a lively tone. "What happened?" Valentina, with her face red from embarrassment, held up the shirt with a hole in it. "It wasn't me," she sobbed. The iron suddenly sparked. She had no doubt that the owner wouldn't believe her. He would probably say that all his household appliances were top of the line, from the best brands, and never failed. So, there was no point in denying her guilt. "Well, there's no need to get so upset over some clothes. It's not worth it." Senor Dominguez crossed the room and embraced Valentina. "Calm down, it's burned, and that's it. Remember, you should never cry over such trifles in life. There will be more serious problems." Strangely, Valentina had always been afraid of the owner, trying to avoid him as much as possible when they crossed paths in the house, keeping her eyes down. But now, when he hugged her, she suddenly felt so good and calm, like never before. It was as if nothing bad could happen to her now. The owner led Valentina to his office, seated her in a chair, took a bottle of wine from the bar, and poured her a glass. She had never drunk such beverages before, and she perceived them as something very unpleasant. She had seen too many men in the village getting drunk. But Valentina took the glass, drank, and the owner began to tell her that the work was almost finished, and soon they would bring the horses. He was a very passionate man, capable of talking about his favorite business with enthusiasm. Valentina's eyes also lit up as she listened to him. "Can you ride a horse?" Victor asked. "No." "Strange, I thought a village girl should know how." "We don't have horses anymore in the village," Valentina spoke more confidently. "They all switched to iron horses, bicycles." "Yes, I've seen that," Victor nodded with a smile, a touching sight when two old ladies ride their bicycles from the store and chat about local news along the way. "But don't worry, I'll teach you. I have a few calm horses that are older and won't throw a child off." Starting from that day, Victor's and Valentina's relationship changed. Valentina could feel it. Firstly, she was no longer as afraid of her master as she used to be, although some shyness still lingered. Secondly, now when they met in the house, he always engaged in a conversation, and his tone was caring. It seemed like he genuinely wanted to help her settle in quickly and get used to things. Valentina even dared to ask something herself. "Time is passing by," she told Victor. "And what?" He didn't understand. "You are busy with the construction, and the land is idle, overgrown with weeds." Can I prepare a garden bed, plant some flowers? They might bloom before autumn. Of course, I'll tell one of the workers to prepare a garden bed for you. Digging yourself must be hard, I suppose. Nah, you shouldn't be worried, I'm used to it. Now, even though Tina rushed to her grandmother's after work, she still found time to do something that wasn't part of her direct duties. Senor Dominguez, whom Valentina began to simply call Victor in her thoughts, would invite her to have coffee together when he had a free moment and inquire about her life. Rosa, with her sharp rural woman's intuition, quickly noticed this. Tina, be careful, she warned the girl. About what? Valentina didn't understand. Well, nowadays, girls just live with men without expecting to get married. If the man is wealthy, they have an apartment, a car, and fancy clothes even without marriage. But you are a decent girl, and there's no hope for anything from our owner. He has a wife and kids. And I've heard that nowadays, it's common for them to have their entire estate registered in wife's names. So, he won't get divorced. And if you decide to stay in our village, you don't need such a reputation. Aunt Rosa, what are you talking about? I've never. It's not my business, but I have to warn you, the worldly wise cook continued, I can see that you also like him. Your voice even changes when he's around. So gentle, and Victor looks at you like a cat. Tina felt so hurt that tears welled up. I've never even thought of that, the girl insisted. I understand who I am and who he is. I spend the whole day with a mop and a vacuum cleaner. Don't belittle yourself. God willing, you'll meet a good guy and get married. But if you mess up your destiny now, you'll feel like you've been dragged through the mud. And Victor will just step over you and move on without looking back. Rosa sighed and began clearing the table. She didn't want to upset the girl, whom she liked, but the woman genuinely believed that she needed to warn the inexperienced Tina against making an easy mistake. For several days after that, Valentina avoided any conversations with the owner, limiting herself to short yes and no answers. The girl completely immersed herself in household chores and returned home, feeling deeply exhausted. There were plenty of chores at home too. She had to take care of her grandmother. The garden was taking a lot of her energy, and the animals required attention. Any other girl in Tina's place, after such exertion, would have slept soundly at night, but Valentina sometimes lay there with her eyes open. Indeed, what had she been daydreaming about? She needed to think about building her own life, a life in which there was no place for Victor. But as soon as she started contemplating this, the future lost all meaning. The upcoming days seemed like an icy desert. And then they brought the horses, several beautiful Arabian stallions and mares. It was expected that the others would arrive later, once the large stable was completed. Tina was sure she had never seen more beautiful animals. She was particularly fond of a petite white mare. Her name is Agra, Victor said with a smile. When we got her, she was completely wild and for some reason couldn't stand children, especially the little ones. Once, some friends with a 2-year-old daughter came to visit me, and while we were talking to her parents, the little girl somehow sneaked into the stable to the horse. She is really beautiful, white as sugar, and when we saw that, her father and mother weren't too scared, but I just lost my speech. I knew that Agra could trample the little girl with her hooves. By some miracle, I managed to lure the horse out of the stall into the aisle, and the mother took her daughter away, but that day I got a few more gray hairs. What a pity, Tina said, thinking to herself, that I haven't noticed a single gray hair in the owner's black hair. I would like to ride her too. So, she used to be wild and fierce? Not anymore, we've done a lot of work with her. Bring some suitable clothes tomorrow, and I'll show you how to ride. Of course, Valentina didn't have any riding pants or proper boots, but she found some trousers and comfortable sandals, and the next day, Victor asked her to interrupt her cleaning. Come with me. But I haven't finished yet, Tina pointed at the vacuum cleaner. You can finish later, I won't have any free time. It was like an exciting adventure. Scary and yet incredibly fascinating. Victor helped Valentina mount the horse, while he himself saddled a large stallion. The motionless Agra suddenly took off at a trot. Get me off! Valentina screamed. "Stay still," Victor ordered the horse. To Valentina's surprise, Agra obeyed him. "We'll go side by side now, at a walk, so you can get used to it." Tina had to grit her teeth in fear, and at first, she answered her companion's questions incoherently. But then, she somehow caught the rhythmic movements of the horse, adapted to it, and realized that she could control her breathing. "Arabian horses are very smart," Victor began to explain. He knew that his calm voice had a soothing effect on the girl. They learn quickly, understand everything on the fly, and become very attached to their owner. A horse is not like a dog in principle. A dog may refuse food if it's offered by a stranger, but a horse, if it wants to eat, will go to anyone. But the Arabians, even in a battle, such a horse won't abandon its owner. It will pull him, wounded, off the battlefield. This first ride together marked the beginning of their new relationship. Now they made time for each other every day to go riding for a couple of hours. Valentina showed Victor the most picturesque places around their village. They visited a distant lake and a remote forest with a hidden trail that only a few locals dared to walk alone. In the woods, you could encounter wild boars or even wolves, but with Victor, Valentina was not afraid of anything. Sometimes, after dismounting, they would sit together for a long time by the river or at the edge of the forest. They always had plenty to talk about. Well, Victor talked, and Valentina listened. He told her about his childhood, about how his parents were very distant from business. They were scientists. Sweet, eccentric people, not very well adapted to life. "I felt really sorry for my mom when I saw her diluting mascara with water because she couldn't afford a new one. And horses, that's been my longtime passion. I used to attend equestrian school and worked at a horse breeding farm." "Well, Tina, don't say later that I didn't warn you," Aunt Rosa said somewhat angrily when Valentina returned from her ride. "Nobody in the village has any doubts that you and our owner are fooling around. Probably, there's no one in the village who hasn't seen you together. This is a village," Valentina thought. "All these local residents will notice, discuss, and condemn. But has anyone thought about my future? Maybe if I stay alone for the rest of my life, doing black and heavy work, they won't condemn me. But what joy will that bring?" By that time, Victor had already occupied all of Valentina's thoughts. For the first time in her life, she had truly fallen in love, and there came a day when what Aunt Rosa had warned her about happened. Valentina changed almost instantly, as if she were convincing herself that she had done the right thing, and there was nothing wrong with it. Aunt Rosa herself said that everyone does it these days. "Look, you're already an adult," Rosa kneaded dough without looking up. "I don't care, times are changing. But I have no doubt that you will be hurt, very hurt." Valentina didn't listen any further and left the kitchen. At first, it seemed to her that her life now resembled a wonderful dream. Victor gave her expensive gifts, and he found it amusing that what made her happiest was not jewelry but a Japanese sewing machine. When he suggested going to the city with Valentina to buy her a beautiful new dress, shoes, and everything else she needed, her eyes lit up. "Let's buy different fabrics instead, and I'll sew it myself. I'm better at it." Victor found this somewhat amusing, but after updating her wardrobe, Valentina truly transformed, and the man admitted that she was indeed a talented seamstress. Valentina only felt ashamed in front of her grandmother that she couldn't do anything. She had convinced herself that she had made the right choice, but still. Senora Esteban ran her hand over her granddaughter's new silk dress. "How beautiful," she said quietly. "Where did you get it, Tincha? It must be expensive, I assume?" "I earn well now, Grandma," Valentina said quietly, hoping that her grandmother wouldn't see anything in her eyes. But Senora Esteban only said, "I'm so glad. That means you won't be left alone when I'm gone." "Grandma, what are you talking about?" Tears welled up in Tina's eyes, and the thought came to her to ask Victor for money for Senora Esteban's surgery. Indeed, why hadn't she done it earlier, allowing herself to buy various rings and brooches? Let the amount be very large, but for their small family, it was a huge sum of money, and for Victor, the expense would be insignificant. And then she was willing to work for him for free for several years, let him deduct the debt from her salary. But Valentina didn't have a chance to discuss this with her beloved. On the following day, Victor, barely exchanging greetings, said that his family was coming to visit him. I thought Veronica wouldn't come so soon. His voice sounded slightly guilty. After all, the house is not yet fully finished. I promised her that there would be a nice pool downstairs in the basement, but she called last night and said she didn't want to hear any excuses. We haven't seen each other for so long, so I'm taking Rico and Nico, and we're coming. So, Tina, you'll have more chores now. We need to prepare rooms for them quickly, and if you can't handle it yourself, let us know, and we'll call someone to help you. And, of course, I'll pay you more since the workload has increased. A spasm tightened Valentina's throat. In her heart, she still hoped that things would turn out differently, that Victor would realize he had found true love and would tell his wife that he was filing for divorce. Of course, he wouldn't abandon the children, he'd continue to provide for them. The boys would come to visit, but apparently, this option hadn't even crossed his mind. Aunt Rosa was 200% right. For Victor, Tina had been just a diversion while his wife lived far away. Another thing that hurt Valentina was that Victor apparently hadn't considered how difficult it would be for her to stay on as a servant when the real mistress of the house arrived. And simply quitting and leaving wasn't an option for Valentina. She wouldn't find work in the village with a salary like the one she was earning now. Aunt Rosa understood everything without words, but she wasn't known for her tact. Had enough fun? She asked, stirring soup in the pot. And how will you now establish a relationship with the new mistress? After all, you're nobody to her. Fetch, carry, and be gone. What am I supposed to do? Tina raised her eyes to the cook with a plaintive look. And Victor, he's quite the gentleman, Rosa protested. In old times, if a lord dallies with a peasant girl, he gives her a cow, and then sends her some dowry from the estate, so the girl won't bother the lady's eyes every day. But Victor, it never occurred to him. He must be sure you won't spill the beans to Veronica. From a human perspective, he should give you some money. But I'm not for sale either. Tina even jumped up. Sit down, Aunt Rosa calmly ordered. What will you do the operation on your grandmother with? How is she, by the way? Badly, she's getting weaker all the time. She hasn't been able to get up for a long time. That's what I'm saying, you have no way out now. You're working unofficially, the bank won't give you a loan, so all you can do, poor thing, is save every penny from your salary. So, be quiet and endure it. Veronica arrived with the children 3 days later. She was a middle-aged woman, roughly the same age as Victor. Her dyed black hair was cut short, almost like a man's. Her makeup was impeccable. Valentina watched the family from the summer kitchen window. She saw the car doors swing open simultaneously, and two strong little boys, without wasting a second, confidently headed toward the house. Veronica, on the other hand, lingered near the car, squinting her eyes as she surveyed the property. When the mistress entered the house, Valentina understood that she should follow her and find out if there was anything needed. Yes, there's still a lot of work here, Veronica casually kissed her husband on the cheek, but I'm glad we came. You must have gone wild here without us. By the way, how could you start construction in a place where there aren't even decent roads yet? If we waited for roads and all the other infrastructure to appear here, we have to buy the plot at completely different prices, Victor replied to her. The woman cast a fleeting glance at Valentina and instantly recognized who she was, without a doubt. Carry the bags from the car to the rooms, she said. It seemed that Veronica was addressing the girl with no disgust, but behind this politeness was emptiness. To her, Tina truly was nobody, an empty space. There were many bags of luggage, and almost all of them were heavy. Valentina carried them one by one. Put the things from this bag to the wardrobe, but don't touch the rest, Veronica ordered her. Tomorrow Marina and Natalia will come, and they'll take care of everything. Valentina understood that she was talking about maids. The hostess wouldn't entrust her own clothes and expensive outfits to just anyone's hands. This day felt unusually long for Tina. Victor now smiled politely when he met her in the hallway, but he walked past her in silence, not bringing up any topics or making any promises. The boys were running around the house, and Tina remembered how her grandmother had raised her, with countless prohibitions. Behave quietly, Senora Esteban used to say. Don't run around, don't misbehave. If you need something, ask for it, ask for permission. But these kids didn't follow any rules. They swung open room doors, chased each other with laughter, bombarded their father with questions about where and when he would take them. They didn't want to eat the food Aunt Rosa had prepared, and even the new mistress pursed her lips at the sight of the dishes laid out on the table. Is the market far from here? She asked her husband. We have traders come to the square twice a week, Aunt Rosa began to explain eagerly. I'm not asking you, the mistress said sharply to her with a frigid tone. Victor immediately understood his wife. By car, an hour and a half, he said, and it was clear that he was referring to the city market. I think by the end of the week, you'll be free, Veronica told Aunt Rosa. Our cook will arrive. In the evening, both Tina and Rosa returned to the village in silence, with heavy hearts. Aunt Rosa had also counted on this job and suddenly lost it. The old saying, though still true, sighed. We've never had money before and we've always been happy. The next day, indeed, two lively city girls arrived. They barely noticed Tina and only approached her when they needed to ask where a particular item was. Marina and Natalia chattered incessantly between themselves but fell silent in the presence of the mistress. It was evident that they knew all her habits, when to prepare a bath, how to hang and arrange clothes, when to bring the first cup of coffee to her bedroom in the morning. By the end of the week, the staff of servants had expanded. The cook and a plump middle-aged woman, whose duty was to look after the boys, had arrived. Valentina, meanwhile, felt like her whole world had collapsed. She had to force herself every morning to walk the familiar path to the mansion. And how easy it used to be for her. Along this path, she used to walk, almost run, but now, when she arrived at the master's house, she didn't know what to do. All her previous duties were now performed by the new maids, and then Tina realized that they left her with the dirtiest and heaviest tasks, washing windows, taking out the trash, scrubbing the bathroom, all of this under the unfriendly gaze of the new mistress. Maybe I'll go to the stable? Valentina timidly asked Victor one day. And what will you do there? He chuckled. I'll even clean up after the horses, shovel manure, anything out of her sight. Victor understood who she was talking about. No, that's not a solution, he said, raising his eyebrows. We'll come up with something, he promised and forgot. Meanwhile, the new cook was preparing dishes whose names Tina had never heard before. How good it used to be for them before. Aunt Rosa set the table, served food to the master, and then they sat together with Tina in the kitchen and ate. They also had coffee right there. Now the Victor family had lunch in the dining room, and then the servants sat down in their hallway to eat, distributing what was left in the pots after the master's lunch to the plates. Everyone here was well acquainted with each other. Tina was never invited to eat, and she was too timid and proud at the same time. She worked all day on an empty stomach, and when she returned home, she fried potatoes or cooked porridge for herself and her grandmother. It was unknown how much longer these battles and moral torments would continue, but Tina had to speak up about quitting herself. Senora Esteban's health was deteriorating, and they had to call an ambulance several times. Her heart is failing, the doctor said with concern. Well, what can we do? You understand, the hospital is overcrowded. They try not to take elderly people like her, and there won't be much care there anyway. Tina understood that she couldn't be away from her grandmother for long now. She approached Veronica, lowered her eyes, and said that she wouldn't be able to come to work anymore. Well, there's no special need for your services now. I won't detain you. You've received payment for this month. Or do we still owe you something? Tina blushed, shook her head, and hastily said goodbye, hurrying away like a fool. She was sure that Victor would be upset that she was leaving and would try to arrange something to see her, even occasionally, but the master did not make himself known. In the following days, Valentina had a hard time. Senora Esteban was dying, and it was clear to everyone already. The old lady withdrew into herself, lay silently without words, staring at one spot. She no longer ate anything and even refused water. Neighbors and acquaintances tried to prepare Tina for the fact that she would soon be alone, but the girl just couldn't understand it, and it seemed that everything could still be fixed, and Senora Esteban would get better. Grandmother died at night, and at dawn, when Valentina woke up, she realized that it had happened a few hours ago. Then there were the funeral and memorial services. Immersed in grief, Tina couldn't think about anything except her grandmother. And when 9 days had passed, Valentina realized that she was pregnant. In the past, she would have hurried to tell her beloved about it, but now she had somehow grown up abruptly, and she had no doubt that Victor would not perceive this as a pleasant surprise. At best, he would give her money to have an abortion. Staying in the family home had become unbearable for the girl. Her grandmother seemed to haunt every corner. She would hear her cough, imagine the old woman calling her, or find herself briefly contemplating what to cook for Senora Esteban's dinner. Tina felt like she was going crazy, and on top of that, if she stayed in the village, she would be the subject of gossip on every corner. Someone would say that it served her right. In short, for the whole village, Valentina's fate would become something like a Brazilian show. And the girl decided to leave for the city. She understood that she was unlikely to find buyers for the old house, except perhaps to request a very symbolic price. But putting up for sale the family's home, where everything still breathed of her grandmother, seemed sacrilegious to Tina. So, she called one of her former classmates, who was studying at the institute and sharing an apartment with a friend. Helena told her that if she moved in with them, they could somehow accommodate her, but she would have to sleep on a folding bed. Tina gathered everything that Victor had given her. At first, she wanted to return the gifts, but then she changed her mind. She had no money at such a difficult time. Perhaps all these little things could be sold or pawned in the city. Helena welcomed her former classmate warmly, but the apartment turned out to be small and cramped. Nevertheless, for such accommodation in the center of a big city, with a metro nearby and the institute just a stone's throw away, the girls had to pay a significant amount every month. It was still more practical than staying in the village. In the evenings, when they all gathered in their small rooms, Tina, Helena, and her neighbor Olivia, they discussed the situation. During the day, the girls were busy with their studies, and the newcomer wouldn't be in the way. Tina was willing to contribute her share to the rent, which allowed the girls to save a lot, but in the evenings, when they all crowded into the tiny room, it would definitely be cramped, and they would have to endure some discomfort. "Let's do next," Helena suggested. "Until your baby is born, you'll stay with us. Try to find some work during that time. Then, shortly before the birth, you can rent a place for yourself and the baby. You understand, it would be unbearable with a newborn here. We still need to study, and we need our sleep." Tina didn't take offense. She understood that her friend was reasoning sensibly. The girls had already done so much for her. In the first few days, Valentina familiarized herself with the city, walking the streets. She was afraid of getting lost and not finding her way home, even though she had memorized the address by heart, and in the worst case, she could ask passers-by how to find a certain street and house. Helena and Olivia were relieved to entrust her with household chores, and Tina tried to figure out how to feed everyone affordably and deliciously. She fried pancakes, baked pies, and cooked various tasty dishes. The girls, who had grown used to quick sandwiches and instant soups, devoured everything she prepared instantly. And going back home was now a pleasure for them. In the mornings, the girls rushed to the institute, leaving unmade beds and scattered clothes, but when they returned, Tina tidied up, the floors were cleaned, and delicious smells wafted from the kitchen, just like at home with their mother. One day, dreamily sighing, Olivia said, "Honestly, if it weren't for the future baby, I would tell you to stay with us forever." Valentina just nodded her head. The largest impression on her in the city was made by the huge shopping center. It was cold outside and Tina came here to warm up. She was surprised to notice that the visitors to the center left their things somewhere in the dressing room, and no one was wearing down jackets or coats. For floors, escalators, shining shop windows. Tina didn't dare to go into any of the departments, just slowly walked by, looking at the things on the mannequins. Benches were everywhere, and the girl sat down to rest on one of them. Nearby, a fountain was bubbling. "Señorita, do you need a job?" A woman suddenly called out to her. Valentina startled. "What kind of job?" she asked. On the one hand, she felt awkward about receiving such an offer. Probably, even a stranger could immediately see that she needed to earn money. On the other hand, money was very much needed. Valentina had already taken all the gifts from Victor to the pawnshop by this time, but apparently they had taken advantage of her inexperience and gave her a small amount. Nevertheless, she had saved it for the baby. "There's a paid toilet on the first floor. You need to sit by the entrance and collect money from those who come in." Although Tina was in great need of money, she blushed and said, "No, thank you." But maybe it was this offer made to her that prompted her to act more actively and boldly. She walked through the floor again and noticed the department for minor clothing repairs. A note was attached to the glass. The announcement stated that they needed an assistant. Tina sighed deeply and entered. The owner turned out to be a middle-aged, slender woman. Sometimes customers bring us clothes from home and ask to sew a zipper on a skirt or mend a small hole. So that it's not noticeable, you know. And sometimes a person buys something here in the mall and needs adjustments, like hemming pants. I set a moderate price for the services, so if I hire you, I won't be able to get a big salary. Wait, do you have any diploma? Have you finished something? No, Tina shook her head, only a high school diploma, but I know how to sew, and I love it, really. If you don't believe me, give me some simple order and see, I won't ruin anything. Soon, Senora Medina was convinced that it was indeed the case. Valentina could be trusted with any work, she did it skillfully. "You're a real find for me," Senora Medina admitted, "because I sat here all day. There are many orders, everyone needs them urgently, it's impossible to leave, and I also need to help my daughter with her grandson." In her heart, Tina envied how good it was when there was a mother who cared for you. Over the years, the girl had already forgotten what her own mother looked like, only imagining her from a photograph. The address book with the addresses and phone numbers of her parents was left at her grandmother's house. Tina didn't even think about taking it with her. The thought that her parents could help her never crossed her mind. Senora Medina didn't deceive the girl, she paid her regularly. On Saturdays, Tina could contribute her share for the apartment, and there was still some money left, but after 3 months, she had to tell the landlady that she would have to go on maternity leave. "I had a suspicion," Senora Medina simply said, "although your figure still shows almost nothing, but my daughter walked just like you when she was expecting her son. Now you'll fire me, won't you? Will you look for a new employee?" Tina asked with fear. She almost had no doubt that it would happen, but Senora Medina shook her head. "Let's do this," she suggested. "You keep working until you can't anymore. And after childbirth, maybe you can take orders at home. You said you have a good sewing machine?" "Yes, I do." "Well, you'll come here, pick up the items, and work at home. Then you'll bring the finished orders to me. Just don't let me down with deadlines, please, or I'll lose customers." Tina promised to complete everything on time. Pregnancy didn't cause her much discomfort. There was no nausea, no drowsiness, just a slight swelling of her legs. It was already the 4th month when Valentina registered at the women's clinic. And here she had a surprise waiting for her. During an ultrasound, she found out that she was expecting twins. "God has decided to reward you, giving you 2 hands," said the elderly female doctor. Tina went out into the street. For the first time she had to stand, overcoming dizziness. How would she manage alone with 2 babies? Would she be able to combine taking care of them with work? Expenses would also increase. There were many questions, but no answers yet. Tina decided not to tell her friends about the twins. The girls would start feeling sorry for her and say that she should have gone to the doctors earlier, had an abortion. Alone, without a husband, she couldn't handle such a burden. But now, she couldn't afford to feel sorry for herself. A struggle for her future and for the children she was already beginning to love lay ahead. In a couple of days, she told Helena and Olga that she was moving. I found a place to live, near the shopping center where I work. It's a small room almost in the basement, facilities at the end of the corridor. It used to be a communal apartment, but it's cheap. Valentina had to exert a lot of effort to make her shabby living space somewhat cozy. The room was rented with furniture. Tina asked her neighbors to help her move the wardrobe. Now the room was divided in half near the window, which was almost level with the ground. The girl placed a table and a sewing machine, and in the other half, there would be a nursery. Tina bought a used crib. Senora Medina brought her a whole bundle of clothes, diapers, all that was left from her grandson. Tina gave birth to twin girls on time. She named the daughters Faith and Hope. There was also supposed to be a third, Joy, but Valentina now lived with faith in the future, hope that everything would be fine, and as she thought, there would be no more joy of love in her life. Now she could hardly trust any man. In the first month, Tina could do nothing else but take care of her girls. The days were filled with chores, and at night, she often had to get up when the little ones started crying. Valentina lost weight, and dark circles appeared under her eyes. Fortunately, she was strong and resilient. She was used to working hard, and now she had also learned to sleep in bits and pieces. When the young mother got used to her new responsibilities, things got a little easier, and when the daughters ate in the evening and fell asleep, Valentina hurried to Senora Medina's place to pick up work. Every spare moment, Valentina sat at her sewing machine, and she always delivered orders on time, never once missing a deadline. Thanks to her hard work, she had enough money for the essentials. When her daughters grew a little and it was time to transfer them to a playpen, Tina laid down a blanket, scattered colorful toys that Faith and Hope could play with for a long time. Valentina herself was now not only involved in clothing repair. In the city, there was a huge selection of fabrics and various sewing supplies at the fabric store. Tina started finding time for her favorite hobby, sewing dresses, blouses, skirts, and jackets. Senora Medina placed them for sale in her store. Both women didn't expect that the goods would be in such high demand. Well-sewn, high-quality items quickly found their buyers. Valentina worked on new designs. Realizing that she would need some document confirming her qualifications, she completed very good courses. Faith and Hope attended daycare, and they moved to a spacious, bright apartment, albeit a rented one. But Valentina began to think about eventually getting a mortgage. Now she had her own little shop, or rather she and Senora Medina rented it together, and they had to hire a few more girls. The two women themselves couldn't handle the increased flow of customers. One day, Valentina received a call from an unknown number, but she recognized the female voice immediately. "Aunt Rosa, is it really you?" Tina was surprised and delighted. "Tincha, I had a hard time finding you. I came to the city for a medical examination, and I had to ask your friend's mother for her phone number first, and then Helena gave me yours. Aunt Rosa, do you have a place to stay? In a couple of days, they'll put me in the hospital. I hope it's nothing serious. Let's go to my place for now. There will definitely be room." It turned out that Aunt Rosa was waiting for a place at the eye hospital. The doctors promised to help her. Valentina met the woman at the bus stop, and they embraced. Tina knew that she wouldn't have to explain anything to her. And indeed, Aunt Rosa just smiled, looking at the girls. "They resemble you more than their father, and there's something of Grandma Maria in them." How she would have rejoiced in her granddaughters. Late in the evening, when the children were asleep and Valentina and Aunt Rosa were drinking coffee in the kitchen, the young woman casually asked if that family still lived in their village. Late in the evening, when the children were asleep and Valentina and Aunt Rosa were having tea in the kitchen, the young woman casually asked if that family still lived in their village. "Ha, you're making me laugh. Veronica threw a fit at her husband just after half a year," Aunt Rosa replied. "She found it boring here, too far from civilization. It smelled like manure. He tried to persuade her, But then, as I heard, a terrible quarrel broke out, and Veronica sold everything to the house, the business. It was all in her name, after all. They left us. The mansion stood empty for a long time. No buyer could be found. Eventually, a wealthy man bought it, all of that property. But he only comes in the summer, like to a summer house. And did they, Valentina's voice quivered, did they move to the city? I heard that they divorced, and Veronica got married again. She's still young, wealthy, she found a new husband like herself, and Victor had to start from scratch. He got involved in some new business, said Aunt Rosa, paused, and added, when he was leaving the village, he asked me about you. It's something, Valentina chuckled, remembering. Why did he need me? Did he need some help? Did he think he could hire me more cheaply? It seemed to me that he's not doing well. He must not have completely lost his conscience. Maybe he's tormented by the thought of how he treated you, and now it's all come back to him like a boomerang. He wrote down his phone number for me and asked me to pass it on to you if I saw you. Valentina tossed the piece of paper with the number into the desk drawer. For several days, she didn't touch it. Aunt Rosa went to the hospital to have her cataract removed. Valentina visited her, brought her gifts, and when she returned home, she found herself constantly remembering the number, but she couldn't bring herself to dial it. Finally, she decided to make the call, not knowing exactly why she was doing it. It was just one of those moments when she couldn't do otherwise. In secret, Valentina hoped that Victor had long since changed his number or simply wouldn't pick up the phone. Yes, she heard the familiar voice. And although Tina had long convinced herself that she felt no more emotions for Victor and that she could never forgive him for his betrayal, in this moment, it wasn't easy for her. Her heart seemed to skip a beat, and she had to wait for a few moments. Finally, she managed to compose herself. "How are you?" she asked him. Then she realized she should have started the conversation differently. She should have introduced herself, said that Aunt Rosa had given her the number, but as it turned out, none of that was necessary. Victor recognized her immediately, just by hearing her voice. "Tina," he said softly and fell silent. A long silence hung in the air, and no one dared to break it. "Where do you live now?" she finally asked. It turned out that he had settled in the same city, not too far from her, just 4 metro stops away. "Let's meet," Victor suggested. "Tell me where you can be this evening." She couldn't meet in the evening. She needed to pick up her daughters from daycare. Of course, she could hire a nanny, and sometimes she did the same, but right now, she didn't want to agree to Victor's offer so quickly. Abandon her children for him? "I can meet in the first half of the day, or are you working?" "I'm not working now," he said, and another long, lingering pause followed. Victor realized that Aunt Rosa had told her everything about Veronica not being on the horizon anymore, how she left, taking the business with her. And there was also the question of whether the ex-husband would be allowed to see the children, because if he was unemployed now, it would be difficult to get decent child support from him. The boys were spoiled. They probably wouldn't miss their father if he couldn't shower them with gifts anymore. Tina suggested meeting in the morning at an inexpensive cafe. She could have invited Victor to a fancy restaurant, but she chose not to. She didn't want to boast in front of him, to say, "Look, I used to be nobody, but now I'm a well-off woman." All of that took a back seat. She just wanted to see Victor and find out about his life. On this meeting, she dressed modestly, a gray coat, smoothly combed hair, but only the look has changed, and that's something you can't hide anymore. Victor immediately understood that she had changed. She used to be a shy girl with a braid and wide-open eyes, believing in everything. Now Tina seemed to have grown up for many years, not aged, but matured specifically. She stood as a self-confident woman, not that easy to knock off her feet. They sat at a table by the window. Tina ordered only coffee, but seeing disappointment in the waitress's eyes, she asked for a pastry as well. "The same for me," Victor said, not even noticing her choice. "So, how are you living? Tell me about yourself," Valentina started the conversation. If she grew up, He looked much older than his years. He had become thin, gray hair, a leather jacket on him, which he wore many years ago. Tina remembered this thing well. You probably know, Veronica got married. Now she's in Italy with children. Today, I can't even fly to them, and I'm short of money, Victor shrugged, and I can't humiliate myself. The boys didn't call me once during this time. Out of sight, out of mind, as they say. So, did your wife leave you with nothing? Almost nothing. Probably should have taken precautions, written something in my name, but who would have thought it would turn out like this? No, she didn't throw me out onto the street. I bought a one-room apartment. So, what do you think you're going to do now? Probably need to start over, but somehow, Victor rubbed his forehead. This blow was truly unexpected for me. I got a job, but didn't last long. I can't concentrate on anything, my hands drop. Well, it's all a boring topic. Tell me more about yourself. I decided to move to the city. It happened that way, Veronica said quietly. But I see you're doing well. You look like, he searched for words, a real lady. I'm glad, very glad. I've been troubled a lot by how everything ended between us, how we parted. Well, we actually didn't part at all, Valentina said quietly. There were no scenes, no explanations, no promises. You just put a cross on me, that's all. The wife came, which means the maid who entertained you in her absence should be crossed out. Victor was silent. Yes, I went to the city to do what I love. In the village, I wouldn't have succeeded. I would have just buried my abilities in the ground. And to you, I'll say, fight. I saw how passionate you were about horses. You're unlikely to find yourself if you deviate from this path. Sell the apartment, buy a house outside the city, roll up your sleeves, and start over. Only then will you stay a human. You know, perhaps you're right, Victor said slowly, you can't change who you are. I always thought you were clever, and now you've found the right words. Since then, they kept in touch. Soon Valentina learned that Victor had followed her advice. He sold his apartment for a good price and bought a small house in a nearby village. Now he couldn't afford to have servants anymore, and he had to work a lot himself, but when he called Tina, his voice sounded completely different. There were cheerful notes in it. There's still a lot of work, he said, and, of course, I can't expect to get back on my feet quickly, but compared to what I felt after the divorce, it's heaven and earth. I didn't want to live back then. Strangely, because I never felt crazy love for Veronica, I just thought it was unshakable that I had a family, children, and that it was forever. And then, in a moment, everything collapsed. Stop reliving your misfortunes multiple times, Valentina advised him. The less you pity yourself, the better. Tell me, what are you busy with now? Well, I definitely can't handle purebred horses now. I can't afford to buy them. Do you have no connections left? Maybe they'll help, give you a loan? No, I don't want to be indebted to anyone. I've come up with something else for now. I'll go buy a few Bashkir horses. They are strong and enduring. I'll develop riding lessons, horseback riding. We have beautiful places here. Well, that's not bad for a start, Valentina agreed. Several times she visited him. Victor showed her his farm, a small stable. They talked a lot, and now Valentina also told him a bit about herself. You can now call me a kind of couturier, she said with a smile. I have my own workshop, a shop, many well-off clients. I participate in competitions, recently received a grant, and I'm going to expand my business. You're so clever, Victor sincerely said. You started from scratch. Not from scratch, but from deep negative, Valentina corrected him. I slept in the kitchen on a folding bed. The girls took me in out of pity. But I endured it. And you will too. She understood that she could have helped Victor financially from the very beginning, offered him money, and made his life easier. Probably, she would have felt quite noble at that. But after the first meeting with him, she wanted to understand if Victor would stand on his own or if he was completely broken. If he were broken, then she would help him, and then she would forever forget his name. But it seemed like he had managed. A few months later, he already resembled his old self, not entirely, of course. He became simpler, and those arrogant, commanding notes in his voice when he was the owner of a large estate, when his authority and disdain for others were evident, no longer slipped through. Now Victor and Valentina were getting to know each other again, and their relationship became more trusting, more friendly. Tina herself sometimes caught herself wanting to call Victor in the evenings and tell him about her day, ask him for advice. "Tincha, my birthday is coming up soon," Victor said to her one day. "I remember," she smiled. "Really?" he sincerely exclaimed. "Well, in that case, I'd like to invite you over. Let's have a picnic, and if you're busy, we can reschedule. You can come whenever you have free time. I'm not offering kebabs, it's somehow cliché. Everywhere you look, everyone's inviting you for kebabs. I have this guy helping me here, and I know he makes pilaf skillfully. We'll sit, drink young wine, and gaze at the stars. You probably haven't seen the Big Dipper in a long time. Probably 1,000 years, Tina laughed. So, I'll be expecting you, Victor replied happily. Valentina told her daughters that they would spend the weekend with someone she really wanted them to meet. This person was celebrating his birthday. What should we give him? Veronica asked with interest. That's a secret, Valentina said with a mysterious smile, but I think he'll really like our gift. On the appointed day, Victor couldn't wait for the guests to arrive. He went out to the road to greet Valentina. He kept an eye out for her car in the distance, but instead, he saw a horse trailer. When the door opened, an Arabian foal impatiently and delicately neighed. It had to spend several hours in that cramped, uncomfortable car. "Oh my God," Victor said quietly, "what a beauty." Then a familiar red Toyota arrived. Valentina was the first to get out of the car, followed by the girls. "I see our gift arrived before us," Valentina smiled, because Victor clearly lost his ability to speak. "Allow me to introduce you, girls. This is Senor Dominguez, and these young ladies are Faith and Hope." "Victor, what's the little horse's name?" The girls' attention was now focused on the foal. "You can come up with a name for him yourselves," Victor said and turned to Valentina, his eyes silently asking, "Are they my daughters?" Tina smiled and nodded. "Yes, they're your daughters."
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.